Take 5,190. Oh my God. All right, so what's up, YouTubers? Jeremy here. Today we're going to discuss the balancing of the internal engine parts. Now, whether you're working with Ford, GM, basically the reality of all that is the same. You want to balance each component to the nearest gram. And that's pretty standard across the board for a lot of builders. If you're working with a general engine, just basic horsepower stock, you relatively don't have to do this. A lot of guys want to actually do it. They just rather call it anal, or they got some extra free time while they're building the engine. That's fine. But if you're going to go into some big horsepower, you're basically going to throw some turbos at this, supercharger, whatever, nitrous. It doesn't hurt. It can't hurt at all. So balancing them internally just means that less likely of having wear on your bearings, and helps that engine rotate a little smoother and performs better. So now the stuff you can do, I'm going to show you here. But what you can't do typically at home is balance cranks. So when you balance out your own stuff, if you're going to have the crankshaft balance, these guys are going to want to do the rods and all that stuff themselves. So if you do it yourself, then they're just going to go behind you and double check it. It's their job to make sure they give you the right application back. So if you're not going for some super crazy 800,000 horsepower performance, in some cases, depending on what the engine is, even 500 or 600 horsepower, you don't really have to worry about doing these kinds of things. So today with this 6-liter LS motor, we're basically using a larger piston. So we already had to take and disassemble these parts, and right before the build I got a little extra time, so I wanted to go through the process of just some of the general consensus of balancing these out. So here we go, is a 6-liter LS motor basically. Now I have a general food scale here that basically will open and close for the wider parts, and it does go in increments of 1 gram. So, and the process is quite literally just walking through each individual component, each piston pin, retainer pin, rod basically, each piston. I have personally grouped out my rings for each individual piston. Of course, I do have my bearings already out also, and I have my rods already sitting out too. So as I'm going through here, I will weigh out each individual setup here, so that way we can see if there's any major variances between each other. So I'll try to get you guys in close enough to see on this, but as you go, you just basically set it on there. We got 469, and I tend to do this in threes. 468, because every scale changes, so a little bit, and since this doesn't go into the 10,000s or 100,000s, we're working with just individual grams. 468. So in threes, if you get a duplicated number twice, you can just run with that. So, and in this situation, I've got, depending on what it is, if I'm writing on my table, or you want to write on a piece of paper next to it, or you have a notepad. Personally, I just basically write it out myself. So I'll come over here next to the piston, put 468. So I will not bore you with every single step of this, but what you're going to do is literally weigh out each individual one, write down the numbers for each individual one, and then see where they're at. So let's assume at this point I have 5 or 6 of these at 468, and I have 1 or 2 of them at 467. So essentially at that point, what I have to do is all the ones that are higher, you will physically, in the case of the piston itself, remove a little bit of material to the inside edges here, inside here. You'll never want to go down here. I've seen people drill these out in the face of this. Not a good idea. You don't want to mess with anywhere where the pin itself is at. But right here is the thickest region or thickest area physically inside these walls here. So you can remove a little bit on the inside edge. You don't really want to mess with the skirt area itself. I've seen some people do so. Come in here and clean up these edges maybe just a little bit. They do have a rather sharp edge on this style here, but right here typically you can't go wrong here. So you just inside here and here and here. So try to do as much as you can between each one. Now there are a lot of videos out there that'll go in further detail and tell you about that. You can also clean up, any edges like this so that way it's just smoother. Long story short, don't mess with anything obviously around the outside edges. So that way you're not actually changing the dynamics of that. I mean, all this is very important for it to be there. So, but safety, inside, 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 and inside here. So, all right. And weigh out each individual one. And if you have, like I said, 6, you could have all of them literally weigh the exact same amount. You just might get lucky that way sometimes. But if you have a couple that are literally 1 gram difference, at that point, you can also come and check each individual pin and see where that is actually at, because the pins themselves can have a possible gram difference. And since one of these pins has to be with each piston, if you have 1 or 2 that's heavier, you can match that up with that lighter piston basically, and now you have that physical weight difference. Otherwise, if you want to change the dynamics of one of these guys, the best way is right here. You just lightly around the inside edge there and the inside edge right there. So typically you're not going to have to do much with these guys. Same thing goes with your rings. I have very rarely ever seen a good set of rings. Granted, and when I say good, I mean the manufacturer's good. You can get the cheap, plain steel, basic Chinese made brands, that might have a big differences. But if you have a good set of rings, or you have a quality set of rings, I should say, then you're typically not going to have a big difference here. So just jump through a couple of these pretty quickly. And exactly 3 sets in a row, all 35 grams. So same thing with the bearings. You're going to notice right off the bat that they themselves, independently or together, all of these guys are probably going to run exactly the same also. So yeah, you're looking at about 40 grams on all of those. The places where you might see the biggest changes are really going to be with your piston itself and the rods. Now, a lot of guys, they have an apparatus that literally will take this rod and support it here and support it here, and they measure the big end and the small end and check the measurements from that area. So they know basically where to remove material from. So if they weigh it from this side and they got all 8 of these guys and it's off by 1 gram, more on this one, this guy's heavier by 1 gram than the rest, and they'll come in and you just basically grind a little bit right here and try to equal it right here. You never really want to go in this area if you can help it. In this case, you can get rid of this, high spot here and high spot there, but otherwise you'd probably end up grinding off a little bit from here. But if you're not going, like I said, to super crazy horsepowers, depending on how you feel about it, you just basically weigh out this by itself. You can take and weigh it out a couple times, and your scale itself might not show the exact same thing as other people's scale, so don't stress that completely. Quite literally, this scale itself, it says 601, but if you get your buddy with the same rod, he might say 602, 603. or even lower. That is just basically the difference between the scales themselves. Unless you're using the exact same scale, then you might actually have an exact same measurements. But what you're looking for is what your measurements are across all of these. So if they all say 601, then you're good. You're only looking if it says 601 for all of these, and this guy right here says 602. So that's what you're trying to change and balance out. So on that note, I'm going to walk through and individually check each and every one of these, and then we'll make some changes at that point. And again, I do this in threes. So okay, so essentially, most of my pistons were coming out of 468 grams. We had one here and one here that was different. We had one at 149, excuse me, not 149. We had one at 469 and one at 467. So 467 is our lowest at this point. Now, in this case, I do have a pin that came in at 149 where the rest were for 148. Actually, I had 3 of those that came out to 149. So, in essence, you just work this guy with this one, and that brings you to the same weight here. Now, all my rings, these I did not write down, but they were all at 35. I did have one set, even though I tried it a couple different times, that was at 36. Now there again, we can do the same thing. Since this has 1 more gram, we can add that, and that would actually put it at the 468. So where everybody else is going to balance out equally with the 35s. Now, in that case, since that is the only one and this is the only one, that's what I'll probably do. So I only need to get anything down that's from a 469 down to the 468s like the rest. So in this case, I only need to work on this guy here. Now, I do have this pin and I do have this pin, so I will need to work a little bit on the inside edge there, just basically cleaning out just a little bit. Also at this side, do the same thing until I get that 1 gram out basically. And once I get those 2 done, then all this should be weighed out correctly once it's paired up. Now, on my bearings, all of them basically landed about 140 grams. This guy here and this guy here almost wanted to get to about 41. You can see the scale wants to jump almost as you keep testing it and testing it, and some of them just goes dead set, so that means it's probably within a half a gram close. So it's more equal to 40 than 41 is what the scale's telling us. Now on the rods here, I did have a little bit of jump up and down here. We had a couple here that were 606, we had a couple here that were 608, and then we had some here that were 607. Now, what we could do is install these inside these guys, using the ones that seem a little bit heavier and go inside the lowest ones. and then re-weigh these and see how they come out. Putting the bearings in basically all of them, and then re-weigh them and see how they come out at that point. And that might actually do the justification there for an overall weight, that is. Now, if you're going for really really high horsepower setup here, you're going to need to set up an apparatus to basically weigh the small end and the big end separately, so you know which end has actually got the extra weight involved. Now, you can do some simple setups. I just kind of welded up a couple things, and unfortunately, the more simple you make the setup, the less accurate it might actually be. Sorry about that. Okay, so you can actually make a pretty simple setup, to hold your piston rods in on the scale itself. So you weigh out all your small ends, essentially. So you weigh out all the small end sides, and then you go and weigh out all the large end sides. And there's a couple different fixtures out there. Some you can actually buy. They can be a couple $100, but if you want to make your own, essentially you can just make something simple like this. Now, this side I make it adjustable up and down. That's for the end that when you want to set up this, you want to be level. So if this guy is not level on here, then obviously it's not going to weigh true each time. So you just get all of this set up. Sorry about that. Just doing it one-handed here. All right. So you just kind of get everything nice and straight. Now you're looking for this to be level right here, essentially. And center of this, as you can see, this will rock and try to get it balanced here. Same thing here. And then you can use a straight edge across the face of this, like I have. And then just essentially you're weighing out your small ends. You do the same thing, write the number down. And then when you're ready, you flip them, readjust for level again, and then weigh out your big ends. So that way if you have, some that are at 164, and then you realize that this was one that was 1 gram heavier, now you know that your short end or your small end is the one that actually had the extra gram. So you can take it off this side. So you're balancing the actual rod itself, which can be super important in those higher horsepower rounds. So on these ones that are heavier than the rest, I'll go ahead and check them here and check which ends are which, and let you know the results soon. Okay, so I figured out that this guy, this one is 608, 608, 608. We've got essentially an extra gram here, and we're looking at probably taking 2 extra grams here. So we get to work this a little bit. We'll probably just take a little bit off the edge there. As you can see, it has a nice little lip, so we just remove that right there. And the same thing there first, give it a quick weigh for the entirety maybe. And then, slowly work at this with a belt sander. You basically just want to stick it up against your belt sander like that and just work slowly like that. Now, if you have some kind of ridge on here, a strengthening setup there, they come also here sometimes. Never go onto the inside edge of that ridge. You work on the 2 upper lips. It could be like a ridge on both sides, kind of like you have right here. So if you have these ridges on here or here, work on your highest points, up there and up there. So that's where you would take your materials when it comes to these guys. So on that note, work each individual piece, keep weighing them out, and essentially you'll get accurate numbers to where everything's weighing out perfectly, and that is basically your internal balancing. Now, when you have the crank balanced also, it's important most of the time when you're doing like the high horsepowers. But if you buy a brand new crank, it should actually already be balanced. You know, not your you know, basic stock build cranks, of course. Some of the higher end stuff, that is. So working each and every part, it's very tedious and very time consuming. As you can see, the video's not short at all here. And even though I kind of skipped around, shot through a bunch of this, it will you know, definitely take up a good portion of your afternoon. So this is why engine builders, you know, cost that much. They're going into such major details, and you know, they're using such seriously highly calibrated you know, scales and you know, tooling to get you to where you need perfectly balanced. So don't forget, that's exactly why we pay them to do it. So if you don't have the patience or don't feel like you have the time to do stuff like this is why you pay somebody else to build your engine. So, but hey, I hope you actually want to give it a shot, and I hope I was helpful. So like and subscribe if you like things like this, and I'll try to put more in the future. So hopefully you get the chance to do these kinds of jobs, and you feel like taking on this task. So good luck in your builds and endeavors, and I hope this video helped you out. So if it did help you out, or if you like it, we appreciate that, of course, and appreciate your comments.